All right, here to talk about everything that's going to happen in 2022 in the midterm elections from the Democratic angle. She knows everything. Okay, there's nobody better to talk about Democratic messaging than Marie Harf. She's a Fox News contributor. She's a former deputy spokesperson for the State Department, for campaign manager for Seth Moulton. She joins us here on the Can We Please Talk podcast. Marie, Mike, and Nick, thank you so much for hopping on the pod today.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel like you oversold my knowledge there. If any of us knew everything the Democrats should do this year, we would all be making a lot more money.
I think the three of us could somehow come up with a better plan, though, just
or at least a
more sustainable one.
Let's see, creating content like this, maybe this catches the ear of somebody. Marie, before we get into the heavy stuff, we've had a bunch of different people on that have worked in different government positions. I would love for you to take our audience into your story. What resonated with you that made you want to work in public service and in government?
Well, that's a great question. I've been in Washington 16 years now. I realized that today, which feels like a long time. So I was in college on 9/11 in Bloomington, Indiana, and was already studying foreign policy, but really felt like it was such a seminal moment. I wanted to help. I wanted to do something to serve my government. And so after graduate school, I applied for one job, and that was to be an analyst at the CIA. And thankfully, I got it. I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't. But that really started my time in Washington. And the one through line I always tell people is my whole sort of reason for being, what I've tried to do here is to help explain to the American people why foreign policy matters, why what happens overseas matters here at home. I mean, you've done whole episodes on things like Afghanistan, for example, and you know that it can feel very far away, but there are often a lot of real life consequences back here at home. So through the CIA, through the State Department, through political campaigns, even for folks running here at home, they all talked about foreign policy a lot. And so that's what I've tried to do.
What do you find to be the difference between, I mean, you've, again, worked through in the CIA, so that's on more the internal side, but then on the more front facing, trying to articulate to Americans, as you just said a moment ago, the importance of having foreign policy, of being aware of foreign affairs from the inside to the outside. What do you feel to be the experience of working for the American government, but then also messaging about its works?
I mean, first, I would say that it is this sounds like a cliche, but the honor of a lifetime to stand at that podium and try to explain to the world what we're doing through some really consequential things, through the Iran nuclear deal, through the civil war in Syria, right? Through things that felt very important. I think two things stick out to me. The first is politics was never divorced from foreign policy. We pretend like it was and it wasn't, but it's gotten so much worse. I mean, it has gotten so much more toxic. It's mirrored our politics with everything else, but I think it has made our position in the world really difficult. Today, when our negotiating team is talking to the Iranians about getting back in the deal, they literally say to them, we don't believe you that if you lose in 2 years, 3 years, that you'll be able to stick to it. And that's really powerful, right? That is not in a good way. I would say powerful, not in a good way. But also, it's increasingly hard fighting the misinformation and disinformation. You all have also talked about this, I know. I can only do so many briefings a day. I can only put out so many tweets a day. I can only get out the information as fast as I can. And we are confronting adversaries at home and abroad that will stop at nothing and put out every bit of misinformation. And at some point, when people stop believing the truth, that is really hard to counter. Foreign policy, domestic policy, anything. And when you have countries like Russia doing it deliberately, systematically, every single day, that's a challenge. And I don't think our government knows how to fight it yet.
Actually, I'm glad you just brought up Russia, because that's, I think, sometimes a story we tell ourselves, or like that's maybe something to unpack, is what level of influence do you attribute Russia to, or specifically the Kremlin, but to what we're fighting right now in terms of misinformation, disinformation? Is it really a case of, on one side, you have the Alex Joneses of the media world that, tell the stories that they do, but then on the other side, there is this foreign influence. In your view, is it more on the foreign side, or is it more of a almost equal balance of just, tomfoolery and just craziness on our part, internally, coupled with a nation's direct efforts to try to disrupt our democracy?
Well, I think it's actually both. The Russians certainly have a playbook that they try and use in a number of countries. They use it here. But that playbook requires a willing audience to really be effective, right? We have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Americans who follow Russian bot Facebook accounts that promote certain political points of view, that went to rallies in 2016 organized by Russian Facebook groups. And when you tell those people, you see these anecdotes, sometimes they don't care as much as you feel like they should. You're like, I would actually care if I was following someone that I thought was an American that wasn't. So I think that Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, there are countries that have a lot of capabilities here. We've seen this. There are non-state actors that can take offline companies, right, with ransomware attacks. But at the end of the day, it is Americans who are willing to believe the lies and promote the lies, even after they're shown to be false. And that's not foreign policy, right? That's like education. That's a whole host of issues back. That's tech policy, right? That's a whole host of domestic issues. But they definitely need that willing audience, and they have it here in the US today.
If our system of government, if democracy as we term it in America is disrupted and it's felt on a foreign stage, I think we all agree we can just, without naming, the several influencers or the impact of it, we all know it's a bad thing, for lack of a better phrase, obviously. But Marie, from where you stand, if you have to articulate that, just that the American consumer of information understands truly what's at stake when you have nations like Iran, China, and Russia that are intentionally trying to disrupt our system of government, what happens, hypothetically speaking, what happens if America doesn't or falls short, if this great experiment that we have doesn't make it out of, short of 300 years? What happens then? Why do foreign actors benefit if we fail?
I mean, we could talk for hours about this, right? And this is why I think a lot about this. And I think I'm really in a kind of a dark place about American democracy today. I think that countries like Russia want us to be in chaos, right? They liked Trump, but above all, they like chaos. And they like us fighting against each other. They like us expending our political capital in ways that make it harder for us to do things overseas, right? And so they want... they don't have, they don't have the need to get their parliament or whoever to sign off on every time they want to do something overseas, right? They just do it because that's their form of government. And they want to show, I think, also to people in their country and around the world that democracy doesn't work that well, right? I do believe what Joe Biden says when he says the sort of the fight of our time right now feels like autocracy versus democracy. And democracy has not shown people around the world that it always can deliver, right? Talk about income inequality, talk about our healthcare system. Democracy is messy and it's hard. And Putin and his friends, and some of those friends are in the US, by the way, make the case that maybe strongmen are better and maybe autocracy is better and maybe that chaos is bad for you. And yeah, maybe you can't vote in Russia, but you also don't have riots in the streets or whatever their propaganda is. So I think it bogs us down. It makes it harder for us to project power around the world and lets them fill that vacuum when we can't make decisions because we're so broken, right?
Right. Marie,
I mean, it's really negative, right? I feel like I'm such a Debbie Downer right now.
No, the reality is actually, no, we had Kim Whaley on the show, a
right.
legal analyst, and you both almost syllable to syllable, both express that same graveness of what's going on. And to hear people who know what they're talking about, which is what we do here, Can We Please Talk? It is frightening because you're both experts in your respective fields and you're both, doomsayers here, but not in sort of the exaggerated way. Like right. Shit is real, for lack of a better phrase. And to hear you both speak to it is astonishing and scary, and we should all be paying attention.
Yeah.
Well, the scariest thing is, sorry, I don't mean to. I will end by the last scary thought. Maybe I won't promise that, but the scary thing is when you get past the misinformation, you just have Americans openly, blatantly embracing strongmen, autocrats. When they say in these recent polls that they feel like violence against the government is okay, right? They're saying the quiet part out loud just all the time. It's not even like they're being misinformed on Facebook. They're just saying it. And that to me is when people are actually praising Putin, that actually to me is one of the scariest things of all. Sorry, go ahead.
No. So listen, this is one of the reasons why we invited you on the show. Like-minded people want to talk to like-minded people, right? Maria, I want to ask you, because we're going to get into you being a Fox News contributor, talking to a former Fox News producer. We're going to get into that angle in a sec. We're going to talk about Democrats and messaging and what you would advise people that are running not only for re-election, but actual election in 2022 in the midterms. The first thing I wanted to ask you, though, you were a spokesperson giving pressers daily, weekly. Jen Psaki's going to be leaving soon. Can you take people inside, speaking of messaging, how tough it is to go out there with some notes and address the press and give the information? Because I think to the outside people, I hate speaking in generalities. Let me speak in actualities. To me, I've never worked in government, right? But I know that corporate America compartmentalizes this thing, right? What the CEO says to the head of a department trickles down. Don't give this out. Don't give that out. Now this comes to your world and you have to go out there and answer questions about it. How tough is that role, and what Jen's doing up there, and the many different people that ran through that last job during the Trump administration? How hard is that job? Take us inside that.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, kudos to Jen for bringing back smarts and stability and sass and all of that to that podium. But it is it's a pretty stressful job because you never want to make a mistake. Mistakes have consequences, right? At the State Department, we would have Bibi Netanyahu or the Russian foreign minister call and complain to Secretary Kerry about something Jen or I said at the podium, right? And that's annoying, but there are real consequences to these things, right? And you don't ever want to make a mistake. And you feel, because you're representing the president or the secretary or your country, I mean, not that you ever want to get anything wrong, but you really don't want to get anything wrong. And the biggest and most important thing is that reporters know that you know what's going on, right? The worst case scenario, we see these stories about some of the Trump press secretaries who barely met with him, who weren't in the room. People know Jen is speaking for Joe Biden, right? People knew that Jen or I had a really good relationship with the secretary. We were in the meetings. We knew what was going on. I think press people are best when we're not talking point monkeys, right? We're not just given a piece of paper and we read it out loud. You're part of the policy. Doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? It doesn't exist separate from the conversation and the public, the conversations that you have. And so you are part of the policy making process every single day. That's why Jen is so good at her job, because people know she's in that room, right? But it is an exhausting job. And it is, under the best of circumstances, I can't imagine doing it with the COVID pressure on top of it. And you can't ever think strategically. You really are like, it's the tyranny of the inbox, right? And so that's why the White House has a comms director too, and that's why there are other people that do that. But yeah, it's crazy all the Trump people that went through it too. It's amazing some of the people who held that position.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad you said talking points monkey, because I don't have a transition for that or a segue. I'm going to try, because
Okay.
Democratic messaging, buzzwords, socialism, communism, taking our guns. How come I can recite all of the Republican talking points and buzzwords, but I can't cite the Democratic ones? Why are Democrats always bad at messaging, or at least getting all on the same page? Why is that? As somebody who's worked in messaging for campaigns at a State Department, why is that? Why is the other team, not that we're on this team, but why is the other team good at messaging?
Well, first, I would say that not that long ago, Democrats were pretty good at messaging. I mean, Barack Obama's campaign, I also worked on that in 2012. Like, we were really good at messaging against Mitt Romney, right? I mean, and so that wasn't that long ago. Feels like it was. I think you just hit the nail on the head with a couple of things, though, that right-wing media, and I would argue most of the Republican politicians in office, are unable to be shamed and I don't mean to sound over the top here, are willing to lie sort of repeatedly. And so the Democratic side often gets wound around the axle of the policy, or how do we talk about the meat of it? We never want to spin anything. And it's like, well, Republicans are just saying whatever the hell they want to say. And so that's really hard to combat against. And that's not an excuse, but when they say, used to, like, on abortion or something, they say the craziest, most offensive thing. I've had people on Fox say the most offensive things to me, right? I don't think the Democratic Party yet knows how to respond to that. I don't think we do. And that's not a cop out. I don't know what the answer is, because you're right. Like, and every race now is nationalized. Every congressional, every school board race is nationalized. And we go in there and we say, that's not what critical race theory is. And there are a bunch of people who will never believe you. I don't know what the answer is, man. I really don't. I think you've identified the problem, and I think there are good tactics for people running in races that they can use, but I do not know how our policies are popular, many of them. How do you make them real? How do we blanket the field and talk about what Build Back Better would do? There are traditional tactics that I think sometimes work and sometimes don't anymore. And I feel like that's an unsatisfying answer, but it's really, really, really hard. I think, look, we won in 2018 because we showed voters that the things the Republicans promised when they were in power didn't come to be. So like Republicans are master shit posters, right? But when the rubber meets I think I can say that here legally.
Your family,
when the rubber,
that's fine.
right? Yeah. When the rubber meets the road, they didn't repeal Obama. They didn't do the things they promised. So Republicans are really good at being in the minority. I don't know. Those are just some initial thoughts.
Marie, it's a complicated question. And by the way, I also think, and you can agree or not, before you go, Nick, there's more money in talking about the problem than solving the problem. It's kind of why we started the show, not really for the money part. It was more of the misinformation, disinformation. And I worked as somebody who was at that network, right? On the news, this, there's a news division somewhere in there. It's hiding somewhere under Tucker Carlson's pants, but it's there, right? And it exists, but those people are not watching between 9 to 11 or at 1 p.m. with John Robb. They're not watching during those periods. They're watching between 8 to 11. So, and then that's the problem that kind of now disseminates. And recent rating numbers just came out. Fox again blew out competition out of the water in the primetime slots, over 1.4 million viewers, right? Where CNN's viewership is dipped and MSNBC's viewership is dipped. So we get into messaging. It's like, well, the numbers are down on the liberal channels, right? They're up on the right-wing channels. So how do you stop the guy who's just making up stuff? And there's a famous saying, don't ever get into an argument with an idiot, because to the outside world, the people won't know the difference. But that's the problem. Now we have this rise of people like that, from the right-wing Republican Party. And I don't know the answer either. I was hoping you would.
Well, look, but Joe Biden also won. Right. So, and a big question for me, I don't know how you all think about this, is there a point where the Republican crazy drug, where there's too much of it, right? They keep having to one up each other. Is there a point where voters, especially voters in swing districts or maybe independents or undecided, are like, okay, man, that's like a little too much even for me. I don't know.
I wonder if the answer to this all lays in what we just saw as the most recent exchange between Dr. Fauci and Senator Rand Paul.
Why would Senator want to do this? So go to Rand Paul website and you see Fire Dr. Fauci with a little box that says contribute here. You can do $5, $10, $20, $100. So you are making a catastrophic epidemic for your political gain. So
you have politically attacked your colleagues and in a politically reprehensible way, you attack their reputations.
Paul is basically, this is his shtick now. He gets Fauci in a congressional hearing and they have this exchange. And now the move is to start questioning his finances. Like, this is where we're getting desperate now, right? But Fauci turned it around most recently and pointed out that all these talking points that Paul has put forward are on his website right next to a button that says to donate. But I do, and what it also gets me thinking too is part of this also, when we think of the numbers, we think of how much Joe Biden won and the battle that lives in the suburbs now that we saw most recently play out in Virginia with the victory by Glenn Youngkin. Is it about sort of identifying the two-facedness of what conservatives are doing? Is it simply laying out the foolishness for what it is and letting voters then see that this doesn't add up?
I think you're onto something, right? I think that's basically what Joe Biden did with Trump. He said, he pointed out the hypocrisy. He also promised, and we can debate how well he's done and why, but a return to, I don't want to say normal, but away from the crazy. chaos only sells so much, and it only sells, I think, I'm on the base, or I'm on a certain percentage of the base. And that's what Joe Biden did, right? He's like, this guy is a hypocrite and he's nuts, and like, I'm going to get back to normal. I think Joe Biden also won on getting results. And that's a challenge, right, for Democrats, because we need these reps, these incumbents, to be able to go into their home districts and say, here's what we did when you gave us control. And like the filibuster and all that, that stuff doesn't really matter that much to voters. Like, there are good excuses for why we haven't, right? Like Joe Manchin's challenges isn't going to win you many voters in a swing district in Michigan, for example. But I think that was part of it. But I think and you both hit something on the head. Like, Democrats also just need to start calling it like it is. We need to talk like real humans. We need to try and not fight the culture wars on their terms, right? We're not going to outgun people. We're not going to out conservative people. That's okay, right? We just need to stop with the talking points and like just talk like real humans and call it like it is and call out the bullshit, right? And say like, this is, just say it out loud. And I don't think that'll win everywhere, but I think that'll win a lot of places.
Call out the bullshit. Call out the bullshit 2024. Marie, I want to ask you, okay, now we've seen the number of how many House Republicans and Democrats are not running for re-election next year. We see how many Senate seats are up. Nick lives in Pennsylvania. Pat Toomey's seat is up over there.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden, Marie Harf gets a call on the phone. Hey, I want you to come run my campaign, right? What is a piece, regardless of state, what is something right off the bat, top 3 things that you would advise that person in terms of running their campaign that we need to focus on from a messaging standpoint?
So I think first and foremost, Twitter's not real life. And I know that's a caricature, because I will do an addendum to that in a second. But like, Joe Biden won the primary and the general because he got out there and he talked to real humans about real things in the way people cared about them. I will, though, say that when you're trying to anticipate right-wing attacks, you have to actually pay attention to Twitter, and you have to pay attention to Fox, because like the other day, some Biden person was asked about Let's Go Brandon, and like made a joke about how no one knew what that was. And it's like, actually everyone knows what that is. And like, if you don't know what that is, you're missing something. Anyways. So I think that getting out there, I mean, especially in these Senate races, right? If we had just won North Carolina, if Cal Cunningham had won in North Carolina, if Susan Collins had lost in Maine, I mean, I think Republicans nationalize elections. And in order to win some of these, we need to take back the actual states on the ground. I don't think you can out-organize some of the crazy, but I think in states like Georgia, you can, right? And so that's what I would say. And like, get rid of the consultants. I mean, as someone who now, is not in the government anymore, but talk like a real human. Don't focus group stuff. Like, you know what people care, and don't dismiss voters' concerns, even if you think they're crazy. Right? You have to have a way to talk to someone who's concerned about critical race theory. You have to. I'm sorry. I don't like that we have to have an answer that's, if you're a politician on TV, I can poo-poo it, right? But like, if you're a politician, you have to be able to say, I hear you, like, let's talk about this. Some people won't listen, but you have to you can't just dismiss the crazy. There's too much of it today.
You bring up an interesting and important point is that, and I think about the nationalized messaging that's going on. And I like what you just said about thinking about local elections. And while I'm a fan of the energy that she brings, but I think of someone like Representative Cortez in New York, in district, I think it's District 15 or District 17. But as a representative, at the end of the day, you simply represent a congressional district, right? So is the attitude to simply say, we're not, to get into a national conversation when we're trying to win a congressional race is the talking point foolishness, or the talking point monkey that we're talking about. It's more about, is it more about just understanding your district, understanding everything soup to nuts? I mean, you've obviously worked for in the CIA, like intelligence matters. Is it just knowing your district, knowing your constituency, and being able to talk at them as humans?
Absolutely. That's exactly right. But the challenge is that you have to, because Republicans nationalize elections, you have to be able to answer and move on. Because I think some of what, look, I live in Virginia now. We moved out to the Commonwealth after 15 years in DC. And part of what Terry McAuliffe did was every time Glenn Youngkin brought up something, he changed the subject to Donald Trump, right? And so it looked like McAuliffe wasn't engaging. Whether or not we like it, a bunch of Virginia voters wanted to talk, and they didn't just necessarily want to talk about critical race theory. They wanted to talk about schools and their kids and education and whether they were open and what they were being taught. And so you have to be able to do both. I think you're right that the ultimate pivot is like, I wanted to, I'll answer all these questions, but here's what I'm going to do for you. I mean, the Republicans have done a very good job at nationalizing issues and making people feel like they matter to them. I mean, even things like immigration, people that care most about illegal immigration don't live anywhere near the border, right? But you can't look like you're unwilling to engage.
Is that simply because nationalizing an election means you get to use talking points that actually aren't grounded in policy? Because to get into a policy discussion, Republicans really usually don't have much of a leg to stand on.
I think that, and also because so much of national Republican politics are based on fear. And I think fear sells, and fear often gets you elected. It gets you a lot of campaign donations. But look, Democrats have seen that campaign donations and nationalizing our elections doesn't win us elections. We poured millions of dollars into Amy McGrath and Jamie Harris, all these people. God love them. I think they're amazing humans. We were never, should we have invested that much in Kentucky? I don't think so. Right? I mean, that we could have used that in a bunch of other places. I think Republicans have, look, they are the party of Trump, but they are not just about him. They have embraced his, I mean, it was before him and it's going to be after him, but the fear, right? And that's that nationalized fear of the other, of losing the country, of it becoming less white and losing, we're losing our schools. That is a fear that clearly has sold for them. And we're talking about building roads and bridges, and that's amazing, but that's harder. It's harder.
The negativity always sells. And let me tell you why it sells. Because as a former Fox News producer and a PA writer there for a few years, Marie, the reason I had you on the program was because, and when I reached out to old contacts back at Fox, I was like, need to get Marie's information. They were like, got to reach out to her directly. I was like, okay. So I got in touch with you, and I've watched segments where you have gone on Fox News. And just like I talked about in the first episode, like we've talked about in a bunch of different episodes with different people across the media landscape on this program, you need to diversify your news sources, right? It doesn't have to be the conventional three of CNN, MSNBC, and Fox. It has to extend to the NPRs, the Reuters, the Bloomberg Newses. You have to really consume and take a series of facts across. I want to ask you, though, before we let you go, why Fox News for you? As a former Democratic strategist, somebody steeped in Democratic politics, somebody that's worked in government before, what was it about going on that network? Because you know the times that they put you on, right? And we know which viewers are watching that. Unless you've been on the 5 recently, which I don't know. But besides the 5 and 8 to 11, there's not enough Marie Harfs going on that programming. And you know that, and I know that. And because I was booking people just like you. So the normal rational news division that lives within Fox is between the hours of 9 to 12 and then 1 to 3 we sprinkle it in. What was it about Fox News that made you want to go on there and be a contributor, have programming like you recently had on that network? What was it about? I should go fight the fight there where they are? What was it about going on Fox News that attracted you to go in there?
Yeah, well, I mean, I started the day of Donald Trump's inauguration, right? My first day out of government. And I joined Fox that day because one of the lessons I learned from 2016 was really that Democrats were not reaching enough people with our message. I mean, I grew up in a small town in Ohio where a ton of people watch Fox, even if they're not conservatives or not Donald Trump fans, right? And so I felt like it was really important, particularly during the Trump years, to have a voice on there. If the numbers, a huge number of people watch Fox, including a bunch of independents, including some Democrats, especially, and it's a little less polarized during the news hours. And I felt like if they never heard from a Democrat, they would always believe the caricature, or if they just heard from more fringe Democrats. I won't name any of them, but like that, it's easy to believe a caricature about someone you don't know. I am not naive and I am not Pollyannish. There's also a limit to that. There are certain shows that I choose not to do. There are certain people that I try not to be on with because I have to protect my own sort of, I don't know what the right word is, but
mental health.
Yeah, but yes. I mean, to put it bluntly, yes. There are certainly limits to that, but I deeply felt that people needed to hear from someone who was providing some other point of view, and that as long as Fox would give me that platform, while it wasn't easy, and there were times that I was very, where things were harder than others. I think COVID's been the hardest, but I thought that was important. And I know there are Democrats who don't think you should do it, right? There are people who don't think I should.
Right. And I totally get that. Listen, it's the reason why we started the show. I worked there for 2.5 years. I've been offered positions to go back to run Fox Nation, which I know you had a show on, I believe. And there was a level of, I don't want to be associated with certain programming that does appear on there, right? I don't know if I can run an entire digital division of something that I don't completely agree with. There are some shows, like we all know, but I've heard other Democratic podcasts, specifically Pod Save America and the former Obama guys, which I know you know. They've all mentioned Fox News being like a fire station, right? A fire station with 4 good firefighters out of 35. So should we close down that fire station? I wanted to bring that to you, but actually before we let you go, this is the last one. That point was made by John Lovett. What do you think of that? Do you think that Fox News, because I let me just give you mine. I don't think that Fox News is the entirety of this. Are they the root cause? Sure. But now other branches have stemmed, and this tree's too big now, because if you put on Dan Ball at 9 o'clock on OAN, or if you put on Greg Kelly at 7 o'clock on Newsmax, a guy who was working at a local Fox station here 2 years ago on a morning show, flipping burgers with Emeril Lagasse in the morning show with Rosanna Scotto. Now, all of a sudden, the election's stolen, and he's wearing military combat boots, and he's rooting for Trump. So there's something happened there. And I know his senior producer, and there's a level of disingenuousness that he tells me goes into that programming. But the problem is I bring it to this format and people still don't believe it, and people still tune in, and people still watch. Is Fox to you are you in the category of demand your cable stations get rid of them? Or are you in the category of, you know what, there's something that lives there and we need to message properly to the people that are tuning in at those times there?
Definitely the latter. Look, I am a person who grew up like loving this marketplace of idea and believing that better ideas would win out. That theory has been challenged a million times over the last 4, 5, 6 years. It's really hard to still believe that, but I don't decide where the American people get their news. I can only choose whether or not I use that platform if it's given to me to promote what I believe is the best path forward for our country. And there are times when I will internally express my displeasure with something that has gone on at the network. That's I'm feel free to do that. But again, like this is Americans are getting their news from Facebook and from Fox and from other cable, and like you said, OAN, Newsmax. Like the American people vote with their remote controls every single day, and these outlets are powerful and they are not going away. And the fact that I've had a platform for 4 years to talk to a national audience about Donald Trump's, I don't even know the words to describe how I feel about Donald Trump, but I had that ability. I had the chance to tell millions of people why I believed he was bad for our country. If that had like a tiny little impact on someone, that sounds so Pollyannish. I think that's probably worth it. And so look, we can't neglect these audiences. We cannot pretend like they don't exist, because they do, and they vote, and we need to win elections. So, at the end of the day, I'm that's still where I am on this. The marketplace of ideas is still like has a little piece in here.
Marie, I liked you before. I like you way more now. For coming to this program. I am so appreciative of you. Marie Harf, you can follow her on social media. Although, by the way, Marie, for those of you listening, there's a Marie Harf fans account on Twitter. Did you know about this? There's a big account that's like 200, 300, 400 people, or maybe 1,500 people actually.
I run it. Give credit, man. What's going on?
Is that right? Yeah, thank you. So I don't have a Twitter account. I gave it up when I left the State Department. I was just getting too much hate. And so, yes, there are some fake Marie Harf Twitter accounts and I think a fan account, but, you know.
Well, either way,
we're just trying to get our blue check, people. That's all I'm saying.
That's it, right? Follow her on Instagram. She's a great listen. Thank you so much for appearing on this program today, Marie Harf. Check her out, Fox News contributor, former state spokesperson for the State Department. Thank you so much, Marie. I literally cannot thank you enough for coming on the program. Continued success to you, and stay safe.
Thank you, and thank you both so much. I love the show, and it's just been great to be on tonight. So thank you.
That means a lot. Thank you.